Hello, welcome into the Sin Bin. I'm your host, Patrick Rocca, joined alongside by Conner Carrington. The Toronto Maple Leafs are first in the North Division, but they're always looking to improve. Just this week, they traded for Alexander Galchenyuk, a reclamation project, in exchange for David Warsofsky and Igor Korshkov. Connor, do you think that this is a low-risk, high-reward sort of thing, or just Galchenyuk just is what he is?
For me, I have to say, he is what he is at this point. You see, he's now 27, drafted in 2012, third overall pick. He just never lived up to the billing. Only one 30-goal season, and this guy just doesn't play any defensive game whatsoever. In the 2017-2018 season, he was a minus 31. Yeah, he's a minus 64 player in his career. Yeah, like I said, for a third overall pick, only one 30-goal season. Of course, the Montreal, they just never knew what they were going to get from him, how they were going to use him. They used him on trying him at center, trying him at the wing. It was just quite the project, to say the least. And now, over the last couple of years, he's been on 5 teams the last 4 seasons. Yes, of course, 2 of the teams have come within this past year, but that to me just tells me it should be seen as somewhat of a red flag. I just don't. For me, the Leafs, I just don't know where he fits in now. Yeah, maybe you try him potentially replace Engvall on that third or fourth line, or maybe Kerfoot, try him again on center, but I don't see where he fits in with the team like Toronto, who are already stacked offensively.
I mean, I would think that they'd move him to the third line for sure, because as you already stated, there's no way he'd be on a checking line like the fourth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he just doesn't care to play defense.
Yeah, and that's one of the things about Galchenyuk that's been so infuriating. I was a big fan of Alexander Galchenyuk in junior, and by extension, Nayu Yakupov, as they were both teammates in Sarnia.
Right.
And they were dynamic. Definitely the most dynamic pairing of players in junior up until their draft year, which is why they both went really high in the draft. It's why Yakupov went number 1. We all know that story of where he went. But, I always thought that Galchenyuk would develop into a first-line center. I thought that was where... I actually thought that a low-end first C was the floor when he was coming in. That definitely hasn't been the case. I think we saw shades of that. I will continue to put a lot of the onus of what's happened to Galchenyuk and what's happened to Nayu Yakupov on their coaches. I think Michel Therrien did a terrible job handling Galchenyuk during his Montreal tenure. Gally was always a natural center. If you follow year by year, there was a significant drop-off, at least from an offensive standpoint, once he moved over to the wing. And it's one of those things where certainly I understand the move to take him from the center to the wing because he's a very one-dimensional offense-first, terrible back checker. But I think it's kind of neutered his offensive ability as well, and that's one of those things that when he was in a stint with Pittsburgh in 2019-20, that stood out to me because the Penguins were trying to put him anywhere they could. He looked decent when he was just coming to the team throughout the preseason. Then he got injured, and then they didn't know where to put him in the lineup for the rest of the year. And he kind of moved around, and he never really looked at home. There's a lot of times that he looked like the worst Penguin on the ice. And it didn't look much better for him in Minnesota either. The talent is there, though, and that's the most infuriating part. I'm leaning to agree with you. I think that we kind of know what he is, but when you see the shot, it's so hard to not look at the shot and not look at the release that he gets off his wrister and not see a way that he can somehow make something of his career at this point. You know, you mentioned how he's a one-time 30-goal scorer, and by extension, he's only hit 20 goals one time beyond that. But when you look at how much time that he's missed, you know, if you look at 2018-19, 19 goals in 72 games, 17-18, 19 goals in the 82, but that's so close that I almost want to say you could almost chalk him up as being a four-time 20-goal scorer. He had 17 goals in 61 games in 16-17. He's got a shot. Where he fits in the Leafs lineup, it has to be third line. It kind of screams desperation in a sense from Dubas, which is weird to say because the Leafs do look so good.
No, it's true. They haven't got much. If there is one thing this season the Leafs haven't got is secondary scoring.
Yeah.
And it all comes down, especially that third line with Kerfoot, BC. Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I'm thinking when I see this trade is this, obviously, just from a pure scoring perspective, the Leafs are going to outscore almost every Canadian team in the North Division. That's what they've been doing. They'll continue to do that. They're secure in getting into the playoffs at this point. I don't think anyone's going to question that. More than likely, they're probably going to come out of the North Division as the champion of the North Division.
As they should, yeah.
As they should. You can check out my article on thetweeners.com if you want to read that. It was, I did go a little bit into how this is the Leafs division to lose. But the thing that's curious, the thing that's curious for me, Connor, is this a case where Dubas is already thinking, conference finals, and this team is going to face, whether it be Boston or Pittsburgh or Washington or the Rangers or whoever, we've still got 3/4 of the season to go. They will face a team that can shut them down, at least on the first or second line, can handle those lines decently well. That he's kind of backpedaling and realizing that there is a hole that is kind of created from trading Kasperi Kapanen, and that you don't have a legitimate goal scorer in your bottom six.
Yeah, no, I don't see what the other reason would be other than to fill that hole for more offensive production in the bottom six, like you said, especially because, like we said, Galchenyuk is a goal scorer, or he's an offensive first player. Because he won't. The thing is, though, he won't bring that quote unquote toughness, I guess, in the playoffs. So if you're looking at him that way, that's just not going to happen. And if there is one, I guess maybe like not to be too concerned if this thing does go sideways whatsoever, is that this is only he's a 1 year, so there's no real skin off anyone's back for Dubas. If things go sideways with Galchenyuk when he does play, they can try to trade for picks because unfortunately you're not going to get much for Galchenyuk now compared to 5 years ago, 4 or 5. So that's the only disappointing part here is his value is dipped considerably over the years, whether that be his lack of playing to just not playing well. For the Leafs, of course, you'd love to see him come in and contribute right away. But I think this is going to be... I just don't see it. I think, he's just been a complete disappointment in my eyes anyway. And whether that be because of injuries, unfortunately, and all that remains to be seen. But yes, like you said, he was back in the OHL, one of the most skilled players. And Burke was trying hard to draft him. If you remember back in 2012, the Leafs were trying hard to get Galchenyuk. And there was a reason why, because he was that talented, or supposedly. So, yeah.
Yeah.
It'd be a great story, obviously. No, I don't hate the guy. It's just...
He's never done anything to me in particular.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think, it is true. If you characterized him as anything other than a disappointment, you would be lying to yourself. However, I do think that we should shift gears to another disappointment. We're a quarter way through the season. What has been the most disappointing team for you thus far?
For me, I look at the Sabres. They of course, that big splash free agency, getting Taylor Hall. You thought maybe, I know they're in a tough East Division. It is a tough East Division, but when you have Jack Eichel and all this young talent, and they're just the same Buffalo Sabres. Nothing's changed. One of the big reasons why is they don't have any goaltending. They haven't gotten goaltending. I think they should have addressed that for sure. But I look at the Sabres like it must be so infuriating. Being a Sabres fan, this team hasn't been in the playoffs. They had the longest drought since what was it, 2011? So it's
and it's not through a lack of trying. We've seen that team change ownership. We've seen them draft Jack Eichel. They've gone after talented players or so-called talented players. They handed that mega contract to Jeff Skinner a few years back that has bit them right in the butt. It's one of those things where it seems like every time the Sabres try and be competitive, some other part of the team just breaks, and they sink right back into a hole. And we've heard already that Jack Eichel is having some concerns with the state of that team. Those rumblings have been around now for about a couple of years. And it really does seem like the Taylor Hall acquisition was almost a last-ditch effort to try and be like, hey, Jack, we're going to get you support. Here's a former Art Ross winner, right? Yeah. Which is weird to say Taylor Hall did that, but he did. And we're trying. Yeah, but it doesn't seem to matter.
No.
I mean, even they've got great young defenseman that I think is a franchise.
Yeah, Darlene is...
He's a franchise defenseman.
Yeah, he is.
And it's one of those things, too, when I think about rebuild, like, if you're building a hockey team, the general trend of the successful teams, like the Stanley Cup winning teams over the past 12 years, has been you have 2 franchise forwards and a franchise defenseman, right? The Penguins, Crosby, Malkin, Letang. The Blackhawks, Taves, Kane, and Keith.
Yeah.
The Kings, Doughty, Kopitar, and then I would say in his heyday, he fell off a cliff hard and quick. It was a big reason why I think that the Kings have been a shadow of them for themselves. But there was a time where I think Dustin Brown, you can make the argument that he was the best power forward in hockey. There was a time that you could make that, and when he was at that level, they
Especially
were winning
that-
Stanley Cups.
He was the type of player you needed in he was a playoff type of player.
Yeah, 100%.
He's perfect in the playoffs.
And then you look at Tampa Bay.
Why they went on runs and they won a couple cups because mostly his line, and then Kopitar obviously played, but.
And then you look at Tampa Bay, right? Kucherov, Stamkos, Hedman. And now I go to Buffalo, and Buffalo has got Eichel, they've got Taylor Hall, and they got Rasmus Dahlin.
Dahlin, yeah.
And they got 4 wins or whatever. Like, what is going on? I just don't understand. Like, this is the thing, is like, even in that perspective, they have the formula.
Oh, and sorry, we forgot about Skinner.
Well, I brought Skinner up because Skinner's been a complete disappointment. Yes.
Oh yeah. He's got 1 point in 12 games.
And they're paying him $9.5 to do that.
Yeah, it's one of the worst contracts in hockey.
It's the worst contract in hockey.
Two bad contracts on this team: Skinner and Okposo.
Yeah, but again, that's what I was trying to get to. Is that like Buffalo? It's not through a lack of trying, and even when they acquire, like I think Okposo was cautioned the minute he signed a deal. But Skinner, there was no reason to believe that Skinner would drop off and become a fourth-line player within just a year and a half of signing that contract. You know, that's a former 40-goal scorer. Guy is 27 years old.
Oh, no. That first year, you thought, wow, what a great signing. But then, jeez,
It almost comes off like they're just cursed. That's the thing, is like I look at the team and thinking, like, in the moment, they're trying to follow the formula everyone else has done to be successful. The formula has worked for everyone else. Buffalo tries the formula, and then parts of it just fall apart. For me, I'll go to my most disappointing team. Buffalo is a really good pick. If I were picking anyone outside of this team, it would have been Buffalo. I think it's got to be the Vancouver Canucks. Vancouver... Ever since Elias Pettersson has been there, I remember watching a Canucks game. We were actually both watching it, I believe, back at College of Sports Media, where we saw our former teacher, John Shannon, in the pregame claim Elias Pettersson was going to be on the level of Connor McDavid. Now, we both thought that was a really hot take.
Hot take, Shannon.
At the moment that it happened, we thought it was a hot take. But it's not like there wasn't any reason to go over the top. Like, he showed so much skill, and so he looked so good on the ice that, like, I would never elevate him to McDavid level like that. But I certainly expected him to become a multiple all-star type player, a franchise player. He has not been that this year, though, and that's the thing. The best offensive threat on this team this year has been Brock Besser, which great. I mean, Brock Besser. I'm glad to see Besser come back. It did look like he was going to have his career on a different trajectory after getting that leg injury a couple years ago, because he did look really promising. He did look like a point per game player. He completely destroys his leg, and ever since he's kind of been hovering around 60 points. Now it looks like he's going back to what everyone expected him to become. But Pettersson is at 13 points right now in 19 games, which is very good production, don't get me wrong, but it's not the level of production that this team needed to get to where everyone thought they were going to go this year. You know, they impressed people in the playoffs last season, and this season coming in, I think most people would have expected them to be the second best team in the North, just behind Toronto.
Oh yeah, from what they did last year, how could you not? Like, they were legit, and then it all started with Pettersson. But I think one of the reasons why Pettersson hasn't been is because the Canucks just haven't been able to keep the puck out of their net. It's hard to score goals when you're worried about, are we going to get scored on continuously? And that's where Markstrom was such a security blanket for that team last year, and that was such a in my opinion, one of the biggest losses for a team, because he was arguably one of their best players, if not their MVP last season. It was, for me, that was probably the biggest shock, and it's definitely paid its toll on the Canucks so far this season, as they give up over 3 goals per game, and second worst in the North Division.
I mean, to be fair, to be fair, I don't know how much I can blame them for moving on from Markstrom, considering what he would have demanded from them, and the fact that I think most of us expected Thatcher Demko to be able to step into the role, maybe not perform necessarily at the level that Markstrom is currently doing in Calgary and did do last season. Goalies with a heavier load, their numbers do tend to dip, but Demko is such a highly thought of prospect, and he's shown flashes of brilliance that I think most people would have expected him to at least keep his save percentage above 900, which he has not been able to do so far.
Right. No, for sure. No, yeah. You have a good point, because the playoffs, that series, one of the reasons why they got so far is, Demko was just lights out when he did play. He faced a pepper of shots. So.
Yeah, and I think that led directly to that decision too, because Demko would be cheaper to hold on to, and I think the other thing, and maybe this is not necessarily the case anymore when we look at a team like the Vegas Golden Knights, but certainly when the Canucks had Markstrom up for re-signing, having a really good goalie tandem was seen more as like a luxury. You don't want to necessarily tie up, $8-10 million at your goaltending position when you have so much of the other team to fill with your cap space. Now, granted, hindsight, it's 2020, and it does seem like now the Canucks would have been better served by maintaining the 1A, 1B role and keeping Markstrom if they could have. If they were given the chance, knowing what has transpired now, I think they would have re-upped on Markstrom. But I don't think there was anything necessarily wrong with the direction that they took.
Right. Fair point. Yeah. No, I'm with you there too. I expected way more from the Canucks. Just because their talent and skill alone. You have Pettersson, Horvat, Besser. He's played well so far, but definitely it's the blue line that's the issue, and they're not getting the goaltending when they've needed it. So, well, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Vancouver.
Well, going from disappointing teams, there are sometimes just individual players that also don't live up to the billing. We already talked about how Alex Galchenyuk has been doing that most of his career, but looking at this window of just this season, what player has been the most disappointing for you to this point?
Oh, it's a tough one. Here, I want to see what you say first.
All right.
Yeah.
My most disappointing player right now, it's actually a goaltender. It's Tristan Jarry of the Pittsburgh Penguins. Now, it's tough because Jarry just earned a new contract for 3 years. Jim Rutherford, then GM of the Penguins, had given Jarry that contract because Jarry had won the starting roster spot over former Penguins, now Senators goaltender Matt Murray, who's also been disappointing this year in his own right. But last season, Tristan Jarry looked so composed, and he was so athletic as well. It almost looked like last season he was like a young version of Marc-Andre Fleury in a way, that his athleticism could bail him out quite a bit. Last season he had 33 games played. He had 243 goals against average, 921 save percentage. I mean, you don't really need much more out of your goaltender than that. And you can see why he ended up winning the job. Even Even so, this season's just been an utter disaster. He's been the worst goalie on the roster. Casey DeSmith, who's a career AHL backup, has now pretty much won that job. A guy who's all of DeSmith is what, 5'11", 6 feet? Not a guy that anyone looked at as a prototypical goaltender, and he doesn't play like a professional goaltender at the NHL level. He's a fringe starter, like DeSmith even right now, valiant effort, but not a guy you want to be like, this is our starter going in the playoffs. But Tristan Jarry has just been so bad that the Penguins don't really have a choice. And what's sad to me is I've seen Darren Dreger throw out the idea of a Sidney Crosby trade because of where the Penguins are. I've seen a bunch of other people talk about, should they trade Malkin? Should they trade the Tang? But the Penguins might be in a much better spot if they just could save a damn puck. The team, don't get me wrong, the team doesn't look like a Stanley Cup contender, even if they had a good goalie, but I don't think you'd be talking about blowing the whole thing up if they had a goalie who had a save percentage better than .875.
Yeah, that I don't care who you are, you can't win with that. Well, Shari did have a solid game last night.
But it's so few and far between with him.
Yeah, no, I agree. No,
and he'll give you one good game. Like this season has been mostly, okay, he'll look good. He'll look good for a game. And then he'll show up the next game. He'll give up 5 goals on the 14 shots and then yank. And it's, what's happening? I don't know what he is. The Penguins defense hasn't been good, right? It hasn't been good, but it hasn't been as bad as these goaltending numbers suggest. This defense, to me, needs a lot of work. The team effort needs a lot of work. They'll probably need to move on from Coach Sullivan, as much as I like Coach Sullivan, and I think he's a great coach, but this team doesn't seem to be responding and playing with heart anymore, so I imagine that move will probably be made sooner or later. But the effort has been about the same this year as it was the year before, and again, Jarry performed significantly better last year than what he's currently doing. So I just there's nothing that I'm seeing from the Penguins the totality of the Penguins' effort that would suggest as sharp of a drop in performance that Jarry has given this year.
Yeah. Okay. So I had to go. I was debating between a couple players. There's enough to be said about the Sabres and Sabres players like Jeff Skinner, but I'll leave the Sabres alone for now and Sabres players. But I'm staying another goalie here, and that has to be for me, Sergei Bobrovsky.
Oh,
my goodness, this guy still hasn't been able to figure it out in South Beach. He's just having another bad start, a bad season. 333 goals against, 884 save percentage, the highest pay. Is he the highest?
Oh yeah, you're paying him so much money.
Yes, I just feel so for Florida right now. How could you blame them? He was in Columbus, arguably the best player, or definitely the best goaltender for those couple of years there, where he won one league MVP. It's just a mystery why he's just not been able to figure it out in Florida. I don't understand it. Because I thought he was one of the best goaltenders out there, and he played in Columbus. But it's just not. 884 save percentage. Like, what? For a guy that's paid
10 million. Yeah, I mean the only guy that makes in the same ballpark of him as him at that position is Carey Price. And the only other guy that ever got paid like that was Roberto Luongo. You know, when you're paying a goaltender more than anyone else on your team, you're expecting them to be a top 2, top 3 goaltender in the world, and that certainly hasn't been the case with Sergei Bobrovsky. It also, I don't want to go deviate from the topic too much, but it does lend me a little bit of pause as to how good Bobrovsky actually was. Not to say that he wasn't a good goaltender in his prime, but we did see the rise of both Korpisalo and Merzlikins last year under that same system in Columbus, and they kept trucking like they didn't even notice that Bob was gone. You know, and with the Tortorella system of hockey, it is very clear that it's about responsibility and never giving up on the play. And, you know, as we've already seen with both Pierre-Luc Dubois and Patrick Laine, Torts will bench you if you don't put in an effort 100% of the time. So you do kind of have to wonder with Sergei Bobrovsky, is did he benefit from how hard of a forechecking and backchecking team Columbus has been?
Yeah, no, you could really highlight how good John Tortorella is, because he does get the best out of his teams. It doesn't matter what players he has. He finds a way to make do and finds a way to win games.
Because the curious part about this, you know, if Sergei Bobrovsky was the franchise, right? If he was the guy, you know, we know Columbus made a pitch to keep Artemi Panarin. They knew they couldn't do anything about Panarin in terms of replacing his offensive ability. But they seemed pretty content about not even bothering to re-sign Sergei Bobrovsky. And in both cases, too, you know, both of those players, both Bobrovsky and Panarin, had already made management aware that their intention was to leave the organization. But I do think it says something that they still tried to convince Panarin. Whereas with Bob, I don't know what they saw. Maybe they knew something that we didn't. Where they were content to be like, if Bob wants to leave, Bob leaves. We can move on without Bob. It's just food for thought.
Mm-hmm. No, well, good on the Blue Jackets for they're seeing that. The hindsight is spot on.
I mean, the Blue Jackets have always been a surprise in that way. You can move teams around or move players around in that organization, and it does seem like they're going to perform to a certain level regardless. So let's just go on to other surprising teams around the NHL. We've already talked about our most disappointing teams. Sorry to all of you Sabres and Canucks fans. We've already talked about the most disappointing players. But what is the most surprising team for you so far through this first quarter of the NHL season?
For me, it has to be the Chicago Blackhawks.
Yeah.
Look, going into the season, they had no expectations going in. And now with Taves injured, they're winning games somehow. They're 8-5-4. Patrick Kane continues to show he's a true leader. Can still play at 32, 22 points in 17 games. They've gotten not amazing goaltending, but good enough goaltending from the new guy, Kakkonen and Malcolm Subban when he's played. So yeah, that tandem has been very serviceable. And this is where it's been quite the surprise with a team that's the ownership addressed it to their fans that we're in a rebuild now.
Yeah, gave out the letter and everything.
And yet they're in a pretty much a playoff spot. If I'm not,
they are in a playoff spot right now. They are currently in a playoff spot, and they don't look like they're going to give it up either.
No.
I,
Yeah.
Pius Suter, I think, is one of the biggest reasons to highlight. I mean, we had already seen Dominic Kubalik break out a little bit last season. I'm not too surprised. We knew the skill of DeBrincat. DeBrincat has always been one of those guys. If you even follow from junior, you knew that he could turn into an elite player. Like DeBrincat, right now, I think DeBrincat's taking that step into, is this guy an elite player discussion, which I think in its own right is huge. I think DeBrincat is starting to solidify himself as having to be brought up in the conversation of best wingers in hockey. Particularly going back to your point on Patrick Kane, I've told you this for 3 years, that I've always viewed Patrick Kane as the guy in Chicago. I always viewed him as the guy in Chicago over Johnny Taves or Duncan Keith. It's not surprising to me that Patrick Kane's leading that team in points yet again, and that even in the absence of Jonathan Taves, that this team can still be led by Patrick Kane. One of the things that is really striking with Pius Suter in particular is Suter's production, just offensively. Johnny Taves is a much better hockey player, but at the end of the day, you win with pucks in the net. And Pius Suter right now is scoring at a pace that, at least on the offensive side, makes up for that gap that Johnny Taves has left. Because Jonathan Taves had turned into more like a 50, 60-point guy over these past couple seasons. If Pius Suter continues to score at currently, he's about a 50-point pace, at least on the offensive end of things.
Yeah.
That negates the missing goals from Jonathan Taves, the missing points from Jonathan Taves. And I think that's gone a long way in replacing Johnny Taves during this leave of absence.
Yeah, no, I definitely did not see Blackhawks performing this way so far. And and they when you have Kane and how well Sutter's play, they're not a bad team to watch. So see how this continues, because Lankinen, of course, this is his rookie season. So I don't. Their blue line is suspect, but right now, offensively, they've done well. So.
And I mean, the other thing too that's worth pointing out is it's not like a case of them being in a bad division. Like, they're in the division of death, in my opinion.
Right.
The only team there that didn't have any playoff aspirations coming into this season was Detroit. But everyone else, like all those teams, came in thinking we can make a run at the playoffs, and a few of them came in definitely looking at the Stanley Cup. You have Tampa Bay, obviously defending Cup champs. Florida has always been at least amassing talent. They've been borderline playoff, usually on the outside of that window, but you wouldn't necessarily call them a completely terrible team historically. These past 3 or 4 seasons, they've always been in that conversation. They're not an easy team necessarily to play against. Carolina was a lot of people's dark horse pick to reach the Stanley Cup Finals going into this season. They're young, loaded with talent. Yeah. One of the quickest teams, one of the best quick strike teams in hockey. Columbus, we already talked about it at length with John Tortorella, how that's a consistently solid team. They upset the Toronto Maple Leafs in the playoffs. It's a team that's one of the toughest teams to play against because they play so hard to that system. Not easy a team to take out. The Dallas Stars, runner-ups in the Stanley Cup last season. That, again, just speaks to the strength of the overall division. And then even Nashville. Nashville could have been on my list for the most disappointing team. I took Vancouver over them, but Nashville's definitely in a conversation. Nashville's too talented to play as poorly as they have. If you were to pick anyone to be the bottom feeders of the Central Division, it would have been the Blackhawks going alongside Detroit. And that hasn't happened.
What happened to Duchesne and Johansson, yeah.
Oh, that could become a whole other podcast.
Yeah, right. Like those guys, man,
But that's just
was
me to highlight the point.
Yeah, Duchesne was one of my favorite players when he first started out, and he's just fallen off.
That was just me going through it to highlight the point that not only was Chicago supposed to be rebuilding, but they're in a division where a team that's rebuilding should be getting slaughtered. They should be Detroit, right? If you're a rebuilding team, they should be a 4-10 team. They are not a 4-10 team.
No.
They're, even if they don't make the playoffs, because again, Columbus is at their heels. Dallas, you got to think Dallas can turn it around. It's just one of those things that they've remained competitive, and they're in the picture. And as long as that happens, I think that Chicago, particularly Stan Bowman, is going to have to ask himself, do I actually have to blow this whole thing up? Because it seems to me that with the young guys contributing, you could actually retool this team and make a run. Even if it's not this season, but next year, when you're back in hopefully normal division realignments. Though you have an even easier time of getting in the playoffs than this season. And it looks to me like if they can survive this gauntlet of death, if they remain competitive, if they make the playoffs or they just miss by one spot, Chicago really has to look and see if they can just maybe add a couple pieces and compete, and maybe they don't need a full rebuild like they initially thought.
Yeah. Oh, but they're definitely, definitely can't say they're not a surprise. It's just,
Oh, really, really surprising.
Yeah.
I'm going to stay in division here. My most surprising team has been the Florida Panthers. They've always been at that wall, as I was saying earlier. Hard team to play against, but they always seem to find themselves like 2 points out of the playoffs, 1 point out of the playoffs. It's one of those things with Florida that they just never could get over the hump. Talented teams. You've seen so many talented players. We've seen Roberto Luongo, Alexander Barkov, Pavel Bure. Lots of guys have worn that uniform, and Florida hockey has been fun to watch at certain stretches. Never could get over the hump. That seems to be changing this season, especially considering that Central Division, as we already talked about, is the division of death. To see them at 9-2-2 is pretty awe-inspiring. I never would have expected them to be able to make this type of run, because especially for me, I was expecting them come trade deadline time to have to think about trading away Barkov. But it seems to me like instead, come trade deadline time, if this keeps up, they're going to be a buyer and not a seller.
Yeah, they've definitely they're exciting team to watch. Huberdeau, Barkov have shown now that they could be considered one of the top two more underrated players in the league. Being the fact that, yes, they play in Florida, but other than that, Barkov, really great player, but great two-way player. He's tough to get the puck off him. He's big, strong. Everything you like to see in a hockey player. Sorry to bring this up, but Patrick Hornquist has been quite the pickup so far for.
He would be my most surprising player. If I had to pick a most surprising player, it would be Patrick Hornquist.
He's still producing. He's still a guy you'd love to have on your team because he's just a workhorse. And in front of the net, he's just such a pain, but in a good way.
He's an even more skilled version of Holmstrom. That's what he is. The way that you looked at Thomas Holmstrom and you saw how you just couldn't get him out of the net, and that's why he was on Detroit for what seems like an entire lifetime. because it was an invaluable skill. Hornquist is if you take that net presence and then you actually gave him the ability to generate some offense. And Hornquist, the reason the Penguins moved on from him is it seemed like he was losing that offensive presence, right? He was still invaluable to me watching Penguins games on the power play. I think it was a mistake to move on from him when it happened. But now it seems like Florida just has it kind of figured out in terms of how to effectively use him and how to put him in situations where he can succeed. And it's been incredible to just see him on pace for career highs in terms of point per game paces. It just seems to click for him in Florida.
Yeah, no, it's definitely he has not missed a step in Florida, which I thought maybe could potentially be a possibility. Of course, yeah, coming from Pittsburgh, where that's just a good all-around team that just knows how to win. Going to Florida, a franchise that doesn't win. No, it's really pretty remarkable, at least. And yeah, and that and Ekblad has played well once again. Like he's shown why why he deserved to be number 1 overall pick in 2014, and he can play, and it's finally things are looking up in Florida. They just got to figure out what's going on with Bob there, but
and the secondary scoring's worth pointing out too. Is like that first line obviously is killer. You know, Barkov to me has always been a severely overlooked player just because of where he plays.
Exactly.
But he clearly is a top center in this league. The first line you don't worry about at all. It's the fact that even guys like Carter Verhaeghe, you know, now you're talking about not just being a one-line team anymore. You know, Verhaeghe has stepped up in that second-line role. And you know, even Anthony Duclair, who's another very underrated player. You know, Duclair gets moved around more than Galchenyuk currently is.
Yeah.
But everywhere Duclair goes, he seems to at least be a guy that can get you like 45, 50 points, which good enough to be second, third line tweener, right? Like good enough to be solidly in your second line. And he's also plays an ability that allows you to move him into the first line of the bottom 6 if need be. Or you can move him up. He's one of those players that you can move him anywhere around in the lineup. Patrick Hornquist, same thing. It's one of those, you know, and then we're talking even about bottom 6, like Alex Wenberg, I think, is a guy that people slept on too as an acquisition that Florida had. You know, I think Wenberg, we've heard people talk highly of Wenberg and what he meant to Columbus. And he's been a solidifying presence in Florida this season as well for the bottom 6. You know, that's just one of those things where if you were to diagnose Florida, historically, it would almost always be top heavy team. This team's got the top heaviness, but when you actually observe the rest of the team now, if Huberdeau and Barkov and Hornquist get shut down, Duclair, and guys like Duclair, guys like Wenberg, guys like Verhaeghe can still step up and pot in a goal. You don't necessarily shut this team out if you just shut out the first line.
Right. No, they're definitely way more balanced than they have been in the past, and it's paid dividends right now. As of right now, yeah, they've beaten Tampa a couple times so far, or at least once this year. So, yeah, I don't see why not. This Panthers team can't make a run in the playoffs. Yeah, come playoff time, finally. So.
And to get an idea for any of the listeners is just how insane the Florida Panthers have been. Bob, despite having a save percentage of .884 currently, still has a record of 5-1-1 in his starts because everything just seems to be working for the Florida Panthers outside of that. If they would have had even average goaltending from Bob in that position, you could probably be talking about a team with only one regulation loss right now.
No, that's where it's like, wow, this team could be the best team in the league, hands down, if they got some goaltending from Bobrovsky.
How many Canadian hockey fans do you think are having a collective aneurysm that the two best teams in hockey, arguably right now, are both in Florida? How many times have you heard that conversation? Hockey has no business being in the southern states. Yeah, well, I mean, all the best hockey seems to be coming out of the southern states these days. So.
Yeah, no, and it's a good time to be in Florida these days for sports-wise.
Oh, yeah.
Especially in Tampa. All they
right?
do is win the city of champions now.
Got the American League champion. You got they got the Super Bowl champion, and you got the Stanley Cup champion.
What are they drinking in Tampa that we need some here in Toronto?
You don't want to become Florida man.
It's true.
So I wanted to bring up most surprising player.
I would love the Sun though in Florida. No, hands down.
I wanted to bring up most surprising player. We already touched on mine. Because you did bring him up by name, Patrick Hornquist. So I'm not going to mention who my most surprising player is because everyone already knows. I'm curious to you, who's caught your eye the most this season? Who's done something where you're like, wow, I'm really impressed by that guy?
Oh, it's a lot to... For me, yeah, I know he was highly touted whatsoever, but yeah, Kaprizov.
Yeah,
I think he can be. Yeah, he's just he great skater. Yeah, I think he's going to be someone to watch out for years to come. This guy, yeah, he's finally someone in Minnesota that is actually fun to watch. That you look forward to watching from us. So they got a good one in Kaprizov. It's he's definitely lived up to the billing.
It's funny because one of my
even though he was a low draft, 135 overall, but man, that's great pick.
I mean, he is a guy, Kirill Kaprizov.
Yeah.
There's 134 players taken before him in that draft. I remember one of my good friends is from Minnesota.
He's the next Datsuk. Like it's being like a low draft pick, right? And just crazy.
One of my good friends is from Minnesota. He's a huge Wild fan, but not necessarily the most knowledgeable hockey mind in the sense that he's never played at any level whatsoever. So he's just a viewer. And he had learned as a Wild fan to always be pessimistic because he got excited from the Suter and the Parise signings of 2012, and then look how that ended up. So Kaprizov's been highly touted, but he's always looked at Kaprizov with kind of a side eye. And after the first game, he just asked me, is this a fluke? Like, do you think this guy's surreal? He's played his first NHL game. Like, go over the tape and let me know what you think. I got back to him immediately. I was like, this kid's real. This is the real deal. Because one of the things that I noticed in that first game that he had played against the LA Kings was he was doing so many things that don't show up on the stat sheet. And I know that's a cliche, but the things that a player does that other players don't necessarily have the intuition to do. I don't know if you watched any of that game or the highlights of that game, but he was finding passing lanes. Like, again, the offense in Minnesota has been inept for a long time, but he could have ended that game with 4 or 5 points in his first career game just because he was finding open lanes. He was making plays defensively. My friend was caught up on the fact that on the overtime winner he had flubbed the deke, but right. I pointed out what led up to that overtime winner was that he immediately recognized that the LA defenseman flubbed the outlet pass and that he could beat any other Kings player to the puck and get that play and create a breakaway, which led to that goal even if he didn't execute the goal properly. And that's one of those things when you watch Kaprizov play, you can just see that he knows things that other players don't know. He's got that hockey sense that you see in a top level talent that signifies that even if he has a game or he goes into a slump, he's creating the chances that he's not going to. I don't see him going in to a state where it's like, oh yeah, Kaprizov is an okay second line guy. He has the hockey sense when you watch him, where it's like this kid at some point is going to insert himself into an Art Ross race, and it would not surprise me.
No, not at all. Not what I've seen. Yeah, like you said with your friend, I thought maybe it could be a one-off after that first game. I had my doubts maybe because it's Minnesota and nothing seems to go right in Minnesota.
Exactly.
Jeez, no, definitely. I very, very impressed this player, and it's a player you should go watch.
He's got one of those talent. He's one of those talents where you'd pay the price of admission to watch it.
I'd go to a Wild game just for him.
And there's very few players in hockey that you would want to buy a ticket to see. Yeah. There are very few guys. And you mentioned Pavel Datsyuk, and I'm not going to call anyone Pavel Datsyuk in their rookie season. I'm not. But it's interesting that you said that because between his stick handling in that game and his defensive responsibility and just how he was aware of everything that was going on, he was in the right place, right time, making the right place, even if other guys didn't capitalize on it. It did remind me a lot of Pavel Datsyuk.
Yeah, no, and another very low draft pick, just like Datsyuk-esque. It's crazy.
Yeah, and he's a proven player too, because a lot of people forget that this guy already has played in the Olympics.
Olympics, yeah. No, that's why, yeah. He was hired down and even founded. Yeah, no, it's very exciting. He's a very exciting player. Fun player.
Yeah, gold medal Olympic rookie. I mean, I don't think you don't see too many of those. Oh yeah, it's his rookie season. By the way, he's got a gold medal.
Gold medal.
Yeah, and you don't see that too often. And I think that luckily for Bill Guerin and the Minnesota Wild, even though his contract is up at the end of the season, he can't get offer sheeted because of the CBA, and then he hasn't had the service time to get that. So at least with how cap strapped Minnesota is because of the previous mistakes that the organization has made. If you look at their cap situation, that is a mess. It's a complete mess. Maybe the worst cap situation in hockey in the Minnesota Wild. But thankfully, it does seem like they're at least going to get another couple years of Kaprizov to try and figure out a way to retain him further down the future and fix this Parise-Suter mess that they have created.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
Both those guys making well over 7. And I think Suter has earned that more than Parise has.
Yes, I agree, yes.
But I would not be paying either one of those guys that money.
No team would now. Yeah, and that's just the fact. That's just fact.
Yeah, and that's one of those things too where I'm pulling it up real quickly here.
Yeah.
They only have 262,000 in cap space right now, and we know the cap isn't going up. That's
Right.
given the whole coronavirus situation, and everything else, and they have so many guys that are up for contract. Just going to give you some names here. Marcus Johansson, who is a guy that they had brought in this season, he's up for free agency. Kevin Fiala, who's been a standout since they've acquired him, they have to re-sign him. He's an RFA. Jordan Greenway, who, again, another important piece to that team. He's going to be up not this season, but the year after. Ryan Hartman, he's up. Eriksson Ek, he was taken actually above Kaprizov in that same draft. His contract is up. They might want to try and retain him as well. Kaprizov's contract's up. And then that, even once we start getting into to defensemen, Ian Cole's up. They'll probably just let him walk. But then you got guys like Bartkowski's up, and then they've got 7.5 committed to Spurgeon until the end of time. They've got 7.5 committed to Suter until the end of time. They've got 7.5 committed to Zach Parise until 2025. It's the same time as Suter. I've just made a joke about Suter.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's one of those things that if you just look at the cap situation, there's so many guys they need to re-sign that are key to the team right now within the next 1 or 2 seasons, and the guys that they're locked up to are either declining or not even really factors in the actual health of the team anymore, right? Like, you need to re-sign Fiala, who I think is very important. You need to re-sign Kaprizov, who's the most important player on the team.
Yeah.
Greenway, all their cornerstones, the guys that I would say make up Minnesota Wild hockey right now, are all up in the next 2 seasons.
Right.
It's actually maddening. I'm so glad that I'm not a Minnesota Wild fan, because if I were a Minnesota Wild fan, I would be stressed as hell.
I know. Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
It's nothing new for Minnesota.
And Minnesota's kind of got the same problem that Buffalo does. Two of the most hockey crazy cities with hockey teams that tried.
Yeah.
You can't, again, Buffalo, they brought in Taylor Hall. They signed Jeff Skinner. Everything falls apart. Minnesota, they bring in the hometown boys. They bring in Parise. They bring in Suter. Everything falls apart. Like, this isn't a case of a team that is trying, this isn't like the Pittsburgh Pirates of Major League Baseball, where you have some just complete freaking bell end of an owner who's only concerned about pocketing his pocket, or lining his pockets with silver. This isn't one of those cases where the owner isn't willing to take a risk. This is just one of those cases where the team tries to win, and every move that looks like a slam dunk on paper turns into an utter disaster.
Yeah, it's you can't explain it. It's just the Minnesota Wilds in that category of franchises that just seem to be, for lack of a better word, cursed. Like, you just don't understand it. Like, your ties with the Lions. Why are they? They never find things out. But it's I don't know. You think at this point, a team like the Wild over the past couple of years would have at least made it to at least a conference final at this point.
And they've been there enough times too.
Yeah, I know. In playoffs, they just peter out. They just don't have they've never had that extra gear or that extra something.
I mean, I'm going to kick it back to when we were kids. I'll kick it back to when we were kids, but I remember.
Yeah.
I remember when we were growing up. Remember there was that team that was stacked in Colorado, right? They had, I believe that was the year they had Solani, and they had Correa, and they had Sakic, and they had Forsberg.
Yeah.
And then there was this kind of new expansion franchise that upset them in the first round, called the Minnesota Wild. With Marian Gaborik and Fernandez in net, and everyone thought that, wow, look at that team is going to that team's going to be something, and the way that the Wild have looked hasn't changed in 2 decades. They are the same team in many ways now that they were back in 2002 and 2003. One or two standout talents.
Yeah.
They play a very defensive, almost trap-like game that is horrifying to watch.
Yeah.
And they show up for round 1, and then they're gone. And it's been 20 years of that.
Yeah. Nothing's changed. Yeah, it's remarkable.
And I think that's the reason why they moved to Bill Guerin as their general manager a couple years ago, was just because try something different. Try and take this team into a direction that resembles something closer to the Pittsburgh Penguins, is what I think they were hoping for by bringing in Bill Guerin as GM, because he was the assistant GM for the Penguins for a number of years. And the issue that I'm seeing when you look at the cap situation is what moves can you even make? It just feels like this team's so cash strapped that you can't.
No, the Suter and Rize contracts. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, they've trapped themselves. I know. It's when they first signed those, I always when they signed those, I always thought that was way too much and way too long contract.
Yeah, 12 years.
Yeah, 12 years. Well, now, of course, with you can't do that now, but
I mean, if only the CBA could save them back then.
CBA,
save them from themselves.
I know. 12 years.
Yeah, and you know what? I do hope, because you're right about Kaprizov. Kaprizov, it is a surprise how good that he looks. I mean, I've been convinced of him since I watched the first game, but coming into this season, I was skeptical myself. And so it is a surprise to see how good he is. And I really do hope for Minnesota hockey fans that he is the savior of that team, that he doesn't go the way of a Marian Gaborik, where it's yet another really talented European player stuck in the Minnesota Wild without any proper support. I hope that this is a different story. I hope for the first time in 20 years we get a different story from the Minnesota Wild as we enter the Kirill Kaprizov era. Yeah. I think that's going to do it for us today. I hope you enjoyed the show, everyone. For Conner Carrington, I'm Patrick Rocca. This was the Sin Bin. We'll see you next time.